Before the pyramids, before the pharaohs we know, there was a warrior king who carved unity from chaos, forging the world's first great nation along the Nile. Step into the dawn of a civilization. Before Egypt's unification, Upper Egypt had largely absorbed Lower Egypt's communities through trade and warfare. Pre-dynastic tombs, especially in Upper Egypt, displayed more and more wealth. At Abydos, in the desert zone known as el-Kahf, a series of tombs from the late Predynastic period show the rising power of southern rulers. One extraordinary tomb, Tomb Uj, dating to around 3200 BCE, contained 12 chambers filled with riches. Hundreds of pottery vessels, some locally made, many imported from the Levant, indicating far-flung trade connections. Tiny ivory tags bear some of the earliest hieroglyphic symbols, likely labeling grave goods by origin and quantity, and even listing names of towns and estates. These inscribed tags, along with cylinder seal impressions from the tomb, are the earliest evidence of writing in Egypt. The owner of Tomb Uj is often called Scorpion. He could be related to the later Scorpion king from the ceremonial scorpion mace head. This artifact from Hierakonpolis depicts a king with the white crown of Upper Egypt, performing a ritual, perhaps cutting the first pharaoh or opening irrigation dikes. In the scene, attendants sow seeds and carry bundles of grain, underscoring the king's role in ensuring fertility and divine order. Above them, symbols represent conquered peoples, captured or dead lapwings. Birds symbolizing the people of Lower Egypt shown as vanquished. Even before full unification, rulers like Scorpion II were conducting warfare against the north and foreigners, setting the stage for a later king's ultimate victory. For those who don't know, our channel tries to share history from all over the world, but have never done ad reads or spoken to advertisers. All we ask is to subscribe if you enjoy these historical journeys, and if possible, consider becoming a member, and we can finish this project together. It was around 3100 BCE that a King Narmer emerged as the figure who decisively unified Upper and Lower Egypt. The Narmer palette, a large ceremonial stone palette discovered at Hierakonpolis, portrays the dramatic imagery of conquest and unification. On one side, Narmer is shown as a dominant figure, wearing the tall white crown of Upper Egypt, gripping a fallen enemy by the hair, and raising a mace to strike the foe. In this iconic smiting pose, the king is accompanied by the falcon god, Horus, perched above captive papyrus plants, a clear symbol of Upper Egypt's god subduing the delta marshlands of Lower Egypt. The other side of the palette shows Narmer wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, surveying rows of decapitated enemy bodies and a procession of standard bearers. It is the earliest known depiction of an Egyptian king wearing both crowns. Narmer now ruled the two lands as a single realm. The artistry already displays the formal conventions of Egyptian relief. The king's larger scale, formal posture and divine symbols, an early codification of what would become royal iconography. For its recording of this momentous event, Egyptologists have called the Narmer palette the earliest historical document in the entire world. Historical and later legendary sources identify the first unifier as Menes. While Menes was long considered the founder of Egypt's First Dynasty, evidence now suggests Menes may have been an honorific title later applied to either Narmer or his immediate successor. By Narmer's reign, Memphis was founded near the apex of the delta, established as a power center, a strategic new capital bridging Upper and Lower Egypt. Tradition holds that the first king founded Memphis by ritually uniting land and water, perhaps by diverting the Nile, and built a fortress or palace there. Narmer's period marks the transition from regional kings to a single king, later called a pharaoh, ruling from a seat that controlled both the Nile Valley and Delta. After Narmer, his probable son or successor Horah, the fighter of Horus, continued the consolidation of the new kingdom. His tomb at Abydos is markedly larger than earlier ones, reflecting increased resources at the king's disposal. In fact, Horah's tomb consisted of multiple chambers, a clear evolution from the single-chambered graves of prior chieftains. Around his tomb were dozens of subsidiary burials of attendants, young men and women whose remains suggest they were sacrificial retainers intended to serve the king in the afterlife. This practice of retainer sacrifice was introduced in the early First Dynasty, highlighting the king's increasingly divine nature. Valued courtiers were expected to accompany him in death as in life. No signs of violent trauma appear on these bodies. They may have been strangled or poisoned rather than brutally killed, a ritualized, almost reverential form of sacrifice. This suggests the hierarchical social order was already firmly in place. The king at the apex, with the lives and afterlives of his servants literally bound to him. Horah likely campaigned to secure Egypt's frontiers. An inscription on an ivory label from his reign may record a victory over Nubian peoples to the south. Egyptian activity in Lower Nubia began in this early period. By the end of Aha's lifetime, Egypt had established a fortress or trading post at the first cataract at Elephantine to control the corridor into Nubia. But farther south, the powerful Nubian culture known as the A group was flourishing. Artifacts show exchange of goods: Nubian gold, ivory, incense, and ebony for Egyptian wheat, linen, and manufactured wares. But by the middle of the First Dynasty, Egyptian forces had pushed into Nubia aggressively. The once thriving A-group culture abruptly disappears from the archaeological record around 3000 BCE, extinguished by First Dynasty expansion. It seems that early pharaohs launched preemptive strikes to eliminate Nubian competition. Egyptian texts later call Nubia Tarseti, land of the bow, and indicate a military presence to guard the rich gold mines there. The very name of Nubia likely derives from Nub, Egyptian for gold. Thus, from the start of Dynasty I, the Egyptian state was both consolidating internally and exerting itself outward, forging an early empire of trade and conquest. Horah's successor, King Jer, further solidified pharaonic authority, and is remembered for an extraordinarily large tomb at Abydos. Jer's burial complex contained over 300 accompanying burials of retainers, the greatest number known, suggesting a particularly opulent court. Ivory tags and wooden labels from Jer's tomb provide early written records. They list regnal year events and offerings, showing that by this time, the Egyptians kept year names to mark significant achievements. For example, one year label might commemorate the year of smiting the Northerners. During Jer's reign, Egypt's influence abroad grew. One account suggests Jer led an army beyond the Second Cataract, establishing Egyptian control over trade routes in Nubia. Such efforts also had the side effect of stifling the nascent Nubian state at Qustul, where local rulers had begun adopting royal regalia similar to Egypt's. By crushing or absorbing these rivals, the First Dynasty kings ensured that, for the next few centuries, Nubia was more or less a client region, its wealth flowing north to Memphis. King Jet, who followed Jer, had a shorter reign, but maintained the structures his predecessors built. Jet's memory is enshrined by a famous carved stele from his tomb, showing his Horus name atop a serekh. His queen, Meneth, would soon play an unprecedented role in the royal succession. The royal cemetery at Abydos indicates that Jet's burial had slightly fewer retainer sacrifices than Jer's. Maybe the sacrificial practice was beginning to wane. Maybe Jet's reign was less prosperous. The reign of Den marked the zenith of the First Dynasty's power and innovation. King Den ruled for a long time, long enough to celebrate a Hebsed Jubilee, a ceremony taking place in a king's 30th year to renew his vitality. A famous ivory label of Den found at Abydos shows the king about to smite a captive Asiatic chieftain, with Den's name in a serekh between them. This label, originally attached to a pair of the king's sandals, portrays Den as a victorious warrior king and bears a short inscription summarizing an event of the year. But under Den, Egyptian writing advanced beyond mere labels. Papyrus was likely used by this time for administrative documents, but none from this era have survived in the humid climate. With papyrus scrolls and a class of scribes, the Egyptian bureaucracy could track taxes, harvests and state decrees in a way not possible before. Administration also became more sophisticated. We hear of high officials, like the Chancellor Khasekhemwy, who was interred in a grand mastaba tomb at Saqqara, filled with records and office equipment, including ink palettes and accountants' tokens. The state was likely divided into provinces or districts, later called nomes, each overseen by royal appointees. Trade expeditions flourished as well. By Dynasty I, Egyptian wooden ships regularly sailed to Lebanon to import prized cedar wood. Meanwhile, overland caravans traversed the Wadi Hammamat to the Red Sea to trade Egyptian goods with distant lands. All this was facilitated by a strong central government at Memphis, which coordinated foreign trade and mining expeditions for turquoise in Sinai or diorite in the Eastern Desert. One of the most remarkable personalities of this era was Queen Meneth, Den's mother. When King Jet died while his son Den was still a child, Meneth likely assumed the powers of regent, effectively becoming the first woman to rule Egypt. Meneth's status is affirmed by her burial, honored with a royal tomb at Abydos on a scale matching those of kings. Her Abydos tomb included many satellite burials of servants and abundant grave goods, including hundreds of wine jars and luxury items worthy of a pharaoh. The concept of a female pharaoh would remain rare in Egyptian history, but Meneth set a precedent that women of the royal family could hold great power when circumstances necessitated. After Den's long and prosperous rule, the latter part of Dynasty I saw shorter reigns and possibly rising challenges. Kings Anajib, Serekh, and Ka each ruled in succession into the late 30th century. Their tombs at Abydos show a decline in subsidiary burials. By Ka's reign, only 24 retainers were interred with the king. This decline might indicate a shift in funerary ideology. Egyptians may have begun using statues or symbolic substitutes instead of sacrificing real people, precursors to the Shabti servant figurines of later periods. Some evidence hints at instability toward the dynasty's end. Fragmentary inscriptions and later king lists suggest that after Ka died, there may have been a struggle for the throne. One candidate, a shadowy figure named Neferka, may have briefly claimed power, but ultimately, a king named Khasekhemwy assumed the throne, beginning Dynasty II. Tellingly, Khasekhemwy's Horus name, which means the two powers are at peace, alludes to a reconciliation. This intriguing name hints that the transition from the First to Second Dynasty was not entirely smooth, requiring a unifier to restore harmony in the dual kingdom. The Second Dynasty continued many First Dynasty traditions. The early Second Dynasty kings, Khasekhemwy and his successor Raneb or Nebra, moved the primary royal necropolis north to Saqqara, indicating Memphis's increasing importance as the administrative and ceremonial capital. While these kings still venerated the Horus falcon as their divine patron, change was in the air by the reign of King Ninurta, the third ruler. Ninurta's reign was reportedly long and prosperous, but some later sources hint that Egypt may have been divided again by the end of his reign. We still have yet to locate Ninurta's tomb, leaving some mystery. But the clearest sign of turmoil comes with King Peribsen. Peribsen, whose name means hope of all hearts, did something unprecedented. He abandoned the Horus falcon in his royal serekh and replaced it with the image of the god Set. In Egyptian royal ideology, the king had always been the incarnation of Horus, the sky god. Peribsen's choice to identify with Set was extraordinary. the god traditionally associated with the Ombos region and often seen as a force of chaos. It has been speculated that this reflects a religious or political schism. A confirming clue is the name of a contemporary of Peribsen, known from inscriptions, a Horus Sekhemwy. Some scholars believe Sekhemwy and Peribsen were the same person, and that Sekhemwy was Peribsen's original Horus name. But Sekhemwy could have been a rival Horus king whom Peribsen defeated. In any case, the fact that both a Horus name and a Seth name appear in this period's record suggests parallel kingships or a dynastic struggle. Peribsen's tomb at Abydos and its associated funerary enclosure are fairly modest, but notably his tomb inscription and stele bear the Set animal emblem clearly, asserting his break from tradition. The full political context is unclear, but later Egyptian memory does not vilify Peribsen, which might imply the conflict was resolved and not remembered as heresy. Perhaps Peribsen's regime was an attempt at religious reform, or a response to a period of strife that required invoking Seth's protective aspect to quell chaos. It is worth noting that Set was not an evil figure in the early pantheon. He was a legitimate deity of Upper Egypt, later associated with strength and the desert. Order was ultimately restored by Khasekhemwy, one of Egypt's most remarkable early rulers. Khasekhemwy, whose name is often translated as "the two powers have appeared," seems to have originally been a king called Khasekhemwy, who fought his way to dominance, possibly defeating the adherents of Peribsen. After vanquishing his rivals, he assumed the name Khasekhemwy, explicitly uniting Horus and Set in his royal title. On Khasekhemwy's serekh, the emblems of both Horus, the falcon, and Set, the mysterious Set animal, sit side by side atop the frame. This profound symbol of reconciliation suggests that the period of discord was over. This could have been a second unification, but it is widely agreed that it may be more a religious commemoration. In any event, Khasekhemwy's reign brought stability and is considered the bridge to a golden era. A limestone statue of King Khasekhemwy, excavated at Hierakonpolis, reflects the might and ideology of his kingship. The king is depicted seated in the jubilee robe of the Heb-Sed festival, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Around the base of the statue are carved the contorted bodies of defeated foes, along with a tally of 47,209 enemies vanquished. This astonishing number of smitten rebels, likely exaggerated, underscores Khasekhemwy's propaganda as the great pacifier of the realm. In one inscription, he even calls himself "He who tames the two lands," reinforcing that he ended the strife and brought back harmony. Khasekhemwy proved to be a prolific builder as well, foreshadowing the monumental construction that was to come. At Abydos, he constructed a massive fortified enclosure of mud brick known today as Shunet el-Zebib. This structure, with walls over 5 meters high, enclosed a vast courtyard and served as a funerary or ceremonial complex linked to his tomb. Shunet el-Zebib stands as one of the oldest surviving freestanding mud brick buildings in the world. Khasekhemwy's tomb itself was also exceptional, as it was the first royal tomb to use extensive stone in its construction. This use of stone not only added durability, but symbolically may have been an attempt to immortalize his resting place in imperishable material. Fittingly, Khasekhemwy's queen, Nimatap, was likely a key figure linking the Second Dynasty to the Third. She is thought to be the mother of the first pyramid builder. From the time of Narmer through the Second Dynasty, the institution of kingship evolved rapidly, developing the divine kingship concept that defined ancient Egyptian civilization. The king was not merely a warlord or chief. He was regarded as a living god, specifically the earthly embodiment of Horus in the First Dynasty. The earliest kings used a single Horus name, written in a serekh topped by the Horus falcon. By King Den's reign, additional titles emerged. The Nebti, or two ladies' name, invoked the patron goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nekhbet the vulture, and Wadjet the cobra, to show the king's guardianship by both regions' deities. Likewise, the throne title appeared, He of the Sedge and Bee, meaning King of Upper and Lower Egypt. A golden Horus title also was adopted, whose exact meaning is debated, but it may stress the eternal golden nature of kingship or Horus triumphant. Over the next 1,000 years, the full 5 names of the royal titulary would become standard. The Horus name, 2 ladies' name, Golden Horus, Sedge and Bee, and their personal or birth name. This elaboration of titles went hand in hand with the growth of royal ideology. The king was the linchpin of cosmic order, or Maat, responsible for maintaining balance between fertility and desolation, between gods and humans. Royal art and symbols from this period vividly convey ideological messages. The crown itself was a key symbol, the white crown of Upper Egypt, the Hedjet, and the red crown of Lower Egypt, the Deshret, which Narmer and his successors are shown wearing, physically embodied the union of dual realms. Kings may have occasionally worn the double crown, the skent, combining red and white. The pharaoh's regalia, such as the crook and flail, symbols of shepherding and fertility, appear in Dynasty I royal burials. A telling practice was the ritual execution of bound captives, as depicted on the Narmer palette and other objects. At least one First Dynasty fortress site in Nubia yielded the skeleton of a decapitated enemy and macabre evidence of ritual execution, likely to consecrate Egypt's victory. The message was clear. Under the god-king's foot, chaos and foreign threats would be sacrificed to guarantee Egypt's safety and prosperity. Religious developments in this period also set the stage for later practices. The Egyptians began to identify certain sacred sites with particular gods. Abydos, where the early kings were buried, was associated with a jackal-headed deity Khentiamentiu, a precursor to the god of the dead. Meanwhile, Heliopolis in Lower Egypt rose as a center of the sun cult, worshipping the god Ra by the end of the early dynastic period. Although the first known sun temple here dates to the Old Kingdom, priests of Heliopolis were probably active by the Second Dynasty, developing solar theology and the creation myth of Atum, who in their theology was the primordial creator god. While Heliopolitan theology would later become more mainstream, in this early era, the religious landscape was more regional and pluralistic. Memphis, the new capital, was dedicated to their own god, Ptah. Tradition says King Menes built the Temple of Ptah at White Walls, or Memphis, establishing Ptah's cult as patron of craftsmen and architects from Egypt's outset. We also see evidence of the Apis bull cult at Memphis by the early dynastic era. An inscription from King Den's time may refer to the burial of an Apis bull. Building a unified kingdom required creating systems to manage resources across hundreds of miles of the Nile Valley. The early dynastic Egyptians excelled at state organization. Central to this was the development of writing, primarily for administrative record-keeping. The economy of early dynastic Egypt was a redistributive system controlled from the center. Agricultural produce, like grain, flax, cattle, was collected as taxes and stored in state granaries and warehouses. Seals of officials like the overseer of the granaries have been found on jar stoppers, indicating the government's role in collecting and dispersing staple foods. Surplus grain was critical. It fed royal projects and could be bartered in trade. Granaries were likely established in every nome under the charge of local administrators, with Memphis coordinating distribution to areas in need. No coinage existed, so Egypt developed an implicit currency unit, the deben, used to value goods for barter. For instance, officials could assess that a pottery jar of oil was worth so many deben of copper or grain, facilitating fair exchanges in the absence of money. Life in early dynastic Egypt was stratified sharply between the powerful elite and the masses of commoners. The pharaoh and royal family stood at the pinnacle. Immediately below them were the high officials, often themselves princes or close confidants, who governed provinces, managed treasuries, and supervised building projects. These elites enjoyed lavish lifestyles. Their mastaba tombs contained fine linen, jewelry of gold and carnelian, cosmetic palettes, games, and imported jars of wine and olive oil. The Helwan necropolis alone has over 10,000 tombs from the First and Second Dynasties, ranging from simple pit graves to large chambered mastabas. Many of these elites likely lived in the nascent city of Memphis, in estates of mud brick villas, enjoying luxury foods like beef and wearing linen garments. For the common people, life was more humble, but they formed the bedrock of Egypt's success. The vast majority were peasant farmers, herders, and laborers living in mud brick houses in village communities along the Nile. They grew emmer wheat and barley, tended vegetable gardens, and raised cattle, goats, pigs, and poultry. Their year revolved around the Nile's flood. During inundation season, when fields were underwater, they might work on royal projects. During planting and harvest, they toiled on the land. They paid a portion of their yield as tax or rent to the state or local temple estates. Maintaining mart involved making sure the Nile flood was managed and granaries could prevent famine. One can imagine provincial governors touring villages to record the flood height and assess taxes, or scribes tallying the harvest yields on clay tablets. In return for their labor and taxes, commoners were protected from invaders and given a cultural identity as Egyptians unified under one king. Large projects like digging irrigation canals or building city walls was likely carried out by intermittent forced labor from the peasantry, an obligation that, while hard, also knit the people into the national project of state building. Social mobility was limited but not impossible. A particularly talented scribe or craftsman could rise in the administrative ranks. Royal favor was a key avenue for advancement. Skilled artisans in the royal workshops at Memphis might produce the fine jewelry and ceremonial objects we find in tombs, and could be rewarded with titles or land. Thousands of exquisite stone vessels were made, found in both royal and elite burials. These objects required specialized knowledge and suggest guild-like groups of artisans flourishing under state demand. Religion and community life intertwined for all classes. We find in villages small shrines or household altars, indicating that common people worshipped local gods or ancestral spirits. The state religion and worship of the Horus king might have seemed remote to them, but they surely participated in festivities when the king's agents came for an anniversary, or when a local temple held a festival. It's always a party when the god Min comes to town. The early dynastic Egyptians themselves looked back on this era with reverence. Centuries later, priests at Abydos link their contemporary pharaohs' lineage straight to the likes of Narmer, Horahar, and Den. They told stories of Menes the Unifier, sometimes embellishing them, suggesting a rule of 62 years and legendary death at the hands of a hippopotamus. By 2686 BCE, as King Khasekhemwy passed, his successor used the stability to kickstart a golden age. The Falcon Kings of Egypt had carved unity from chaos, forged divine authority in stone, and claimed the two lands under Horus's gaze. But what came next will echo through eternity. As the gods settled into temples and the old kings took to their thrones and tombs, the kingdom would instead turn to the sky. And soon it would build fantastic monuments, seemingly knowing the only eternity is in death.